everyone. Good morning, or depending on where you are, good afternoon. Before I begin, I just want to share a couple of procedural things. You'll notice that the chat function has been disabled. However, throughout the presentation, you can reach Jason, my amazing colleague who's here with us on the back end, through the Q&A feature if you have any questions or concerns or need assistance. And you can also use the Q&A feature throughout the webinar to pose questions to today's speakers, which will get addressed at the end of the webinar. Please also keep an eye on the chat box for us, because at the end of the webinar, there will be a survey that we hope you'll take to let us know how you liked today's webinar and what you'd like to see in the future. You'll also notice that this webinar is being recorded. That means that you can revisit this webinar and all of our past webinars at any point. In a moment, my amazing colleague Jason is going to post the link to that in the chat. And then this webinar will be posted probably in a couple of weeks. Without further ado, welcome to the Alliance Against Violence in Adversity's Webinar Wednesdays. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Yercich, and I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional and ancestral territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. And on behalf of AVA, which is a national organization, I want to begin by acknowledging that we encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the lands on which they live, work, or visit, and become engaged allies together. We, as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and their rights and responsibilities in cultures, languages, and the pursuit of wellness. The focus of today's webinar is 3 Decades of Impact, the FREDA Center for Research on Violence Against Women and Children. Today's speakers are myself, Dr. Sarah Yercich, and my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Margaret Jackson. I'll be playing a bit of a dual role today. You're usually used to seeing me as the host, but today I'm also a host and a speaker. I want to begin by introducing my amazing colleague, Dr. Margaret Jackson, who is the founding director of the FREDA Center for Research on Violence Against Women and Children, the current co-director of the FREDA Center, a professor emerita in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser University, and past director of the Institute for Studies in Criminal Justice Policy at SFU. And I, her dutiful co-presenter, have been with FREDA since 2013, and currently since 2025, I am the co-director alongside Margaret. In addition to the FREDA Center, I'm an adjunct professor in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser University and a full-time instructor in the departments of Criminology and Sociology at Capilano University. And without further ado, I'd love to hand it over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Sarah. And what I'll do is begin by setting the stage with how the FREDA Center started and its early days, and then Sarah will continue with our more recent projects and development. So I'll start by explaining how an initial application to SSHRC and health grant was made, to the subsequent acceptance of the application, to the early development following that. So one of the primary mandates of the grant was to advance knowledge about the systemic roots of violence against women and children by supporting and undertaking participatory action research. And so what happened was that interested representatives from UBC, SFU, and at that time, a community research center downtown, came together to discuss an application. And after a long, key initial meeting, however, those numbers did dwindle down to 2 representatives, one from UBC and one from SFU, me. However, the application was successful, and after being awarded the grant, our organization did proceed. And first, our name, which I take full credit for almost any drop of the hat, and that is FREDA, and that stands for Feminist Research, Education, Development, and Action. And I thought that was very clever, actually. And the selection of the location was to be downtown at Harbor Center and not up on Burnaby Mountain at SFU, because obviously the focus was to work with community, and it was hard to imagine community coming up Burnaby Mountain for meetings anyway. So we then began, the 2 of us, to post and hire for an overall administrator as well as for a financial administrator. And we also secured office space for those personnel. And so we're beginning to grow, growing pains a bit. And it was agreed upon that given our mandate to work with the appropriate community organizations on research, we should actually connect and nurture those relationships, which we did successfully over time. And from these connections, we did develop an advisory committee with not only representation from these community organizations, but also from other academic and legal connections. And it must be said that the advisory committee has been terrific for us as far as sharing what's going on of relevance in the community for us to hear about and other community members, what's coming up, and just the sharing of practices and projects. So we're very pleased to continue that tradition of the advisory committee. So, for example, to have in the same room a representative from police services and some from legal organizations as well as community group organizations. Uh, it's been extremely helpful with the sharing of relevant information and actually the building of trust and even friendships over time. So, a very good idea. And initially, FREDA provided grant funding. This was the idea of, first of all, okay, we'll provide grant funding for a wide variety of projects in the community, with the center providing research assistance to community groups who identified relevant projects for their own interests than to pursue as research. However, that proved not to work very well at all. And the feedback was that the groups really didn't have time to focus on research ideas, never mind doing the actual research itself. So we shifted, we moved to having our advisory group identify issues in need of being researched, as well as those arising in consultation with the other Alliance member centers. And we would then undertake the research ourselves, and that has worked out. So one idea which started to crystallize early on was triggered by a student on our advisory committee, Asmina Lada. She was a recent graduate from UBC, and she was responsible for one of our main foci becoming young women. She organized a large conference for young women down at Harbor Center early on, and it was a huge success. And as a follow-up, she then also began, as part of our FREDA advisory committee, organizing a group of these interested girls who, moving forward, determined for themselves the name Go Girls. And one outcome was a publication emerging from some of the girls writing about their own experiences called Rewriting Reality: Young Women in Their Search for Self. So, in addition, as time passed, through sessions at Harbor Center, interview questions were developed and actual interviewing techniques discussed with the girls of how to make interviews. How would you actually gain information of import? And a few of the Go Girls did then subsequently do um, interview and analyze the interviews with girls from a couple of centers across Canada, and then they shared their findings with other Go Girls. As well, a key highlight for one of the girls through invitation was flying with me to Ottawa in 2006 to attend and present at the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights. Along the way, I also had the opportunity to work with a group of young Indigenous young women many years ago, not strictly a FREDA project originally. However, as this actually stemmed from an academic project, it was not my own, but I had assisted with it. But after that project finished, it led to a group of the girls still wanting to continue to meet, and they got to meet in this elementary school somewhere. And in fact, we did then continue to have meetings, and they themselves came up with another name, uh, Girls Group with a Z at the end, Girls Group. So this was all approved by the school they were meeting in, and a school staff member also assisted with this. And most of the girls came to like basketball because after hours, when we were meeting in the school, we had access to this stage that also doubled as a basketball court, and they came to like the game. So what I did, I took, I brought them up to SFU Burnaby campus to meet the women's basketball coach and the team and do a workout with them. And that was certainly a big hit. On another occasion, they were given throwaway cameras to capture what they felt was meaningful in their community that they wanted to capture. And the result was quite a number of photos that were taken and developed. And then the director of Harbor Center, where we had our office, agreed to have them publicly displayed and shown on the bottom foyer with the very kind provision of frames provided by the director. And the girls were very pleased. It was heartwarming to see how they reacted. And here is one of my favorites. It was actually taken in the actual schoolyard. So moving on, FREDA also became engaged with research on a policy scan of relevant policies addressing the justice system response to IPV in 2008, the Leslie Tutty Transition House Study in 2009, Victim Services Canada-wide scan on information collected on victims in terms of what services existed around 2010. As far as larger projects, and we certainly have undertaken those, the Building Supports Report was an early major accomplishment. It was released in 2017. It actually, though, began several years earlier, and it was the policy component to a study that FREDA undertook with the BC Society of Transition Houses with funding from the Law Foundation, the Vancouver Foundation, and the Representative for Children and Youth. So, given the nature of this project, we did have a special advisory associated with it, for which we had representation from Ottawa with the Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada unit, as well as relevant Vancouver and BC community organizations represented as well. So after a lot of effort and time passed, but almost immediately after the release of the report, and that included to the advisory members, we did receive from IRCC representatives information that they had just started the process of implementing one of our major policy recommendations for expediting the temporary work permits for immigrant women. And Kate Rossiter was a key member of that research team. She's also on staff as an associate director. So we come to the Canadian Domestic Homicide Prevention Initiative with Vulnerable Populations, and I will not repeat that title in my subsequent discussion here. But the FREDA Center was a partnership member of that project. It was a 5-year project, and most of you are familiar with, funded by SSHRC to conduct research on domestic homicides in Canada, identify protocols and strategies that will reduce risk, and to share this knowledge with the wider community. And as Alliance members will recall, the project was co-directed by Dr. Peter Jaffe and Dr. Myrna Dawson, and the FREDA Center worked closely with CREVAC and the Center for the Studies of Social and Legal Responses to Violence, and EVA, the Ending Violence Association of BC, and the Muslim Resource Center for Social Support and Integration, and the latter as part of the Immigrant and Refugee Populations Research Team, co-led by Dr. Kate Rossiter and others. Research assistants for that research team included Dr. Sarah Yercich, whose picture you see with her, Abir Al-Jamal, Randall David, and Misha Dillon. And I was a project collaborator on that one. So shifting again, and this was another major focus for the FREDA research, widening the net was on the processing of family court cases. And I personally collaborated with the Honorable Justice Donna Martinson on many projects and presentations, even after she retired. And we went into action together fairly quickly after connecting in 2012 with the impetus at that time, it was very good timing, being one of the annual National Judicial Institute meetings being held here in Vancouver that fall, and the theme being the processing of DV cases. And in attendance were to be the judiciary from both the family court and the criminal court. So for that meeting, we immediately went into action and organized a community consultation with local groups, such as the Jane Doe Group, representatives from the key Lower Mainland agencies working with DV survivors. Also in the groups were survivors themselves, so we did get input into their experiences anonymously with the justice system processes in DV cases. We paired that in thinking of all these various approaches, with a focus group made up of BC judges and justices, which was undertaken by the Honorable Justice Martinson herself. And she asked the same questions about the processing of DV cases as had been asked of the community focus groups. And we similarly then did interviews together with Crown and defense lawyers, again asking those questions. And that did result in a major report called The Risk of Future Harm, which is on our FREDA website. And I'll get to that again at the end. The exercise did start a partnership which still continues. And one other Justice Martinson project of note was a webinar entitled Implementing Children's Rights in Family Court Cases. And that was produced by FREDA as part of the research project being undertaken by Public Health Agency of Canada, along with other Alliance members centers. It was presented by the Honorable Martin, Judge Rose Raven, Lauren Irvine, and Suzette Narbonne, with me narrating. And the focus was upon viewing children in Canada as full rights bearers, which includes making sure, first, that they are safe, secure, and well, free from violence of all kinds within their homes, in quotes, and after separation, and two, that their rights to be heard in all judicial proceedings when courts are determining their best interests are effectively implemented. The rights applying to all children, including those in cases involving family violence and or, in quotes, parental alienation. Finally, I will add that early on, we also engaged with the Yukon Status of Women upon invitation on a court watch program with them. And Kate Rossiter was a key FREDA Center representative on that one. So we traveled up to Whitehorse, Kate once or twice, and I did about 3 times, to work with them. And it was an amazing, well, it was an inspiring and rewarding experience, in part because of their director, who is such a powerhouse and who accomplished so much from a very tiny office. So this has been admittedly rather rapid, but just a sampling of our earlier FREDA research. Others include one on a focus on animal abuse, one on mental health, one on the girl child, but there were many others as well. So in closing, let me encourage you to check out the FREDA website, fredacenter.com, for all of our reports, presentations, and history. And along the way, we did engage a tech person to provide us with monthly graphed usage stats represented by hits to the website by total numbers, both new and returning, and hits by geographic locations of cities and countries, new users and how long they engage when they're on. It's very interesting to follow. So I will now turn it over to Sarah to focus on the more recent FREDA research projects for which she has been involved. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And Margaret underplays, I believe, a lot of the amazing and important work that she does, not only in these projects, but also behind the scenes. So thank you, Margaret. And what I'm here to chat with you about today is a little bit of an overview of our more recent research. I'm going to start with FREDA's research on a national scale, so our larger national collaborations, and sort of work down to the provincial level and then the local, truly just FREDA-based research. I do want to emphasize, though, as Margaret mentioned, FREDA has been in operation for 33, 34 years at this point, so anything and everything we can share with you is just small little highlights from the sheer amount of things that we've done. But our website, to encourage those hits, really is a great place to go and to see some of the other projects that we weren't able to highlight today. So on a national scale, and was one of the first five gender-based violence research centers across Canada, which is a huge accomplishment. And early on in FREDA's existence, we partnered with the other gender-based violence and feminist organizations across Canada to create the Alliance of Centers on Gender-Based Violence. These we refer to as our sister centers. Our sister centers enable us to do collaborative research across the country. And a few of those larger projects that have just happened in recent years are things that I'm going to speak to now. Margaret already started to discuss the Canadian Domestic Homicide Prevention Initiative with Vulnerable Populations, or CDHPIVP. But one of the things that FREDA was able to do in collaboration with our sister centers, who led a variety of different hubs. FREDA led the Immigrant and Refugee Hub. We had the Rural, Remote, and Northern Hub. We had Indigenous Peoples Hub and Children Who Witness Abuse hubs. And across those hubs, we generated a significant amount of resources, such as learning briefs, conference presentations. We hosted a number of conferences. But one thing that this project was able to contribute within the Canadian context, which is significantly lacking in terms of literature and knowledge around these things, is there was a multi-phase research study. The first couple of phases were really looking at that, what do we already know? And then the latter phases were looking at how can we understand this deeper. And those included very in-depth interviews with key informants, so folks who work on the front line, for example. And then latter phase, phase three, was narrative inquiry with proxies being family members and friends for folks who were killed through domestic homicide or survivors of nearly lethal violence. And I encourage you to check out those findings because I would argue within the Canadian landscape, it contributed a lot of knowledge into risk and to barriers of safety, especially for folks who encounter multiple and intersecting barriers. More recent knowledge in the two projects I'm about to speak to are deeply interconnected. We worked on the Family Violence Family Law Project, or FVFL, and the Awareness to Action Project, or ADA-A. These were run primarily out of our sister center, CREVAC, at the University of Western Ontario, and we were a partner center. And the Family Violence Family Law Project was the seed project for everything that happened after that point. The Family Violence Family Law Project was focused on creating open, accessible, and evidence-informed resources for lawyers, for practitioners, and for judges on family violence and family law and emerging issues across all of the provinces. This project also started communities of practice in all of the provinces where our sister centers are located, so that the project would be and would remain really truly informed by lived experience and by folks who had firsthand knowledge from frontline work. Out of that 3-year project developed the Awareness to Action project, where we moved beyond knowledge mobilization, although we did retain things like webinars, legal bulletins, learning briefs, which again, as a little pitch, are on our website. But this led to, again, through primarily spearheaded by our CREVAC colleagues, but also supported through the sister centers, FREDA included, the development of an evidence, trauma, and violence-informed parenting planning guide, which is referred to as eSafer. This was funded by the Department of Justice Canada, and it is available free online to access. That was part of the grant. So you are able to access it now. And although I'll speak to this momentarily, we will in BC be running additional trainings on the tool very, very soon. And then one of the other partnerships we have through our Alliance of Centers and through our sister centers is how you're joining us today, the Alliance Against Violence and Adversity, which is run out of the University of Calgary under Dr. Nicole Letourneau. And FREDA is a partner on that project. which helps us enable a lot of things, including, for example, this webinar series, and also recent collaborative research, knowledge mobilization, and a lot of training opportunities. A lot of the work FREDA does beyond our sister centers and beyond our national collaborations focuses on provincial impact. Provincial and local impact are, I would argue, the heart and soul of the FREDA Center. Our national collaborations are important, they're powerful, we appreciate them, but our provincial impacts is really where I think FREDA makes the largest, push for change. So one of the earlier projects I was involved in was a Pause for Hope Animal Foundation program evaluation. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Pause for Hope is an organization that focuses on keeping domestic violence survivors and their pets together when they leave violence. And they brought FREDA in. I think we were considered contractors, I can't quite remember, but they brought FREDA in to do an evaluation of their programming and to look at best practices and next steps. We've also recently collaborated with the BC Office of the Human Rights Commissioner to support their inquiry into hate. Margaret, myself, and our colleague Connor McMillan did a comprehensive literature and policy review related to domestic violence in the context of COVID-19. We focused significantly on that intersectional lens, so looking at, for example, Indigenous women, women in rural, remote, and northern areas, disabled women, elderly women, racialized women, and how they faced increasing barriers to safety under typical everyday contexts. I use that in quotations, but especially compounded by COVID-19. And the report details not only a systematic literature review, but also we offer a lot of recommendations for policy and practice that are included in the BC Commissioner's broader inquiry into hate. Our full report, easily accessible online, is called COVID-19 Through an Intersectional Lens, Safety, Security, and Rights. And most recently, we were brought on board, and this is actually dovetailing out of some of the work that Margaret and Donna did with the representative children and youth. And we were on the research team looking at family violence to support their examination of the wrongful death of a young Indigenous boy who was in the care of the Ministry of Child and Family Development and the representative children and youth here in BC. And the report out of that is called Don't Look Away, How One Boy's Story Has the Power to Shift a System of Care for Children and for Youth. And I think they're just reaching their second or third anniversary of the report. So if you follow that online, it's very interesting to see sort of what policy recommendations were put into force and sort of where the province still has a significant amount of work to do in terms of keeping people safe in general, but more specifically, Indigenous peoples, families, and youth. And last but not least, we have a lot of what I would call more smaller scale internal projects that focus dominantly locally, sometimes provincially, where we undertake research like Margaret mentioned that is suggested, for example, by our advisory committee, or that are more of passion projects to us where we seek out smaller grants to help us support this research. One we're currently working on is the Child Homicide Project. This looks at child homicide in the context of high conflict family violence and family law cases here in BC. What we're doing for that is a systematic literature review and a case analysis with the support of a number of amazing colleagues, research partners, and research assistants. We do not yet have that report out and about, but keep an eye out for it. It's underway. Similar to the international student study, where we are examining through the use of a survey of service providers at post-secondary institutions, especially those who support and work with international students, about the safety and security of international students and the barriers to safety that they experience when seeking support. And much earlier, or I would say in its infancy almost, is a study on the strength-based responses to survivors of domestic violence. We're just about to embark on a systematic literature review, looking at strength and resilience-based responses to working with survivors, as opposed to those that are more traditionally used, that look at deficits, at risk, at vulnerabilities. And this is a lot more in line with not only just the strength and resilience-based literature, but also looking at things like Indigenous approaches to violence and joy and resiliency. And last but not least, later this fall, and this is what I said we would come back around to, we will be piloting the eSafer evidence-informed parenting planning tool through trainings on the local stage, well, provincial, I should say. beginning this fall and running through the end of next summer. So if you are a family law lawyer in BC watching this, we would love you to email us. We will be running trainings regionally across the province to train on the eSafer tool and run evaluations of those within the BC context. So please keep in touch. There will be two in the Lower Mainland here in BC, and then 7 other online regional trainings across the entirety of the province, including the island, the northern context, and our eastern context as well. Which just brings me to another pitch for FREDA before we get to the part of the webinar that I'm absolutely most excited about is Margaret and I could only touch on a few things here today. And we've discussed this leading up to the webinar, so many amazing colleagues and friends of the center, research partners, research assistants, advisory committee members who have contributed to the success of the center throughout our existence. One of the beautiful parts of FREDA, I would say, is community led and it's community informed. And I think that is what distinguishes us most often. So please do check out our website to see more of the things that we've been involved in and more of the amazing people who've supported our work throughout the time. And now I do want to turn to, oh, I should mention the QR codes you've seen on your screen throughout, they link you either to specific reports or webinars or just more generally to, for example, our website here on the screen. But what we're wrapping up our webinar with is actually a discussion where I'm going to pose a few questions to Margaret, where she can speak to a lot of the history and the development of FREDA, because people in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser talk about Margaret being the heart and soul of criminology, but she's also the heart and soul of FREDA. So, Margaret, can I ask you a few questions? So, the first question, and it's, oh, sorry, Margaret, please.
Yes, sorry to interrupt the
Yeah, of
flow,
course.
but I would be greatly remiss if I did not personally thank you, Sarah, for all that you have contributed to the Frida Center. And she's a terrific co-director and continues to help make it thrive. So thank you, Sarah. Okay, first question.
That is so kind of you, Margaret. I couldn't do it without you. So, the first question I have for you, because I may have been involved in the last, let's say, 13 years of Frida, but Margaret is Frida and Frida is Margaret. So, based on your history with Frida, from development to now, Margaret, what do you think were the most important decision made during Frida's early years and the development that contributed to this long-term success?
Okay, thank you. And I did give it some thought here. It seems to me that, well, the critical questions initially were to actually have it housed, the Frida Center housed downtown. And that has led to making the community around us to feel that they are also, and we are also part of their community. And that was a very good decision to have made. Also, it was a way of being and how we proceeded to establish the advisory committee because we did want to uh, become more connected and nurture the relationships with the community itself. But that advisory group was also extremely helpful, certainly even now, because it led to the sharing of ideas at the meetings. It led to an understanding of what all was happening, as I'd said earlier. However, I think a key point here is that certainly what we hear back from the members is that that was a very good way to have unfolded to proceed. Obviously, we couldn't, with our original idea of having the community groups uh, give us the ideas and then they could get assistance with their doing it. That was a key decision as well. So it's something that we take on as our responsibility. And let's see. All right. Well, that relates. There's also a question. I think that's more the second question though. But that and being selective then, not closing out any interest expressed to us. And that also occurred from a couple of organizations. They've heard about the Frida Center and what you're doing. Well, it would be, could we hear more about? So that did occur as well. So it's something that was organic, that naturally grew as a community group and not as a SFU criminology project, research project.
Absolutely. And I would agree completely. Even to date, Margaret, what you're saying, community is core to what FREDA is. And so, for those of you who aren't aware, the center was founded on participatory action research and also, as Margaret just spoke to, community partnerships. So, Margaret, adding to what you just shared with us, how do these principles distinguish FREDA from more traditional academic research centers?
Love to tackle that one. Yes. So, and being housed and nurtured in an academic setting to do research, yes, it was very important to have a different mindset myself. And that was to see that, okay, we're not studying the community members. They're also helping study as part of the research group. And I think the Court Watch program was a very good example of that. I think it's very important to understand that we did not view community members of the advisory group as subjects, as you would do in an academic study. Say, oh well, yeah, we can do a survey with this, and we can do a report. And no, to come up with the development of perhaps of a meaningful survey or be inherently involved is rather different than traditional principles, if you will, or understandings about how traditional academic research proceeds.
Absolutely. And it's something interesting as you speak to it, Margaret, that I see researchers only grappling with on larger scales very recently. So Frida in that sense was very ahead of the game in terms of treating people and as members of the center with lived experience, understanding the experiences that they live through and helping us look into those.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So, throughout its history, Frida has brought together universities, community organizations, survivors, folks with a variety of different lived experiences, legal professionals, and policymakers. In your experience, what challenges and what benefits have come with maintaining such diverse partnerships over so many years?
Yeah, very good question. And it has to come down to one principle, really, because having diverse community groups doesn't necessarily mean they're going to act as a community when undertaking of a whole to undertake the research itself. In fact, we did have some challenges along the way. Early on, we had the departure of some key players and also certainly continuing from time to time to have funding issues. I think it's very important to recall that what had to be reinforced along the way is that very many diverse community groups in the advisory had different ways of thinking about how to proceed, but the basic goal was the same for all of them. That is to deal positively and effectively with domestic violence, and whether it's in the courts, the police, uh, and in terms of then coming together to say, oh, well, you know, yes, if housing here could be increased or that kind of emphasis made, that will definitely help the homeless on the street, the women who are vulnerable. So it's forces of thinking of how each can work together for that same goal. And that's the unifying force, I think.
That is so well said. And I think the solutions we always talk about when we think about these things are the value of collaboration and the barriers to it. But one of the points of pride, I think, Frida, and thanks to you, Margaret, is that collaboration is the core of who we are, and it's not something we tack on after the fact. And as the final sort of bigger question, and this is a time also for those of you who are in the audience to start putting your questions in the Q&A. What do you think has allowed Frida to remain relevant and influential for over 3 decades?
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, Margaret, yes.
No, no, that's right. No. Of course, yeah, number four. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think a number of key issues, and it pertains to both settings. So, yes, we have maintained a positive reputation within criminology. That certainly has not helped. That has not unhelped us. It has helped us immensely along the way. And I think that it also helped us bridge the gap too, because we have to work in this more academic setting as well. So to do maybe not interpretation, but I think it is to make clear what FREDA does was very helpful to do along the way. And I think also the fact that we maintain the active advisory group and keep them informed along the way. It wasn't just in name only, and they would contribute ideas for research and to then understand what has happened, unfolded, and is planning in the future as far as the research that we've been doing. I think that was what I had said primarily. Uh, well, yes, and I think along the way, the fact that we would collaborate, we can collaborate with different community groups, but we also undertake mutual research from the Alliance across Canada. So those are extra strings that aren't normally, especially Alliance across the country. It was a case of having done particular research here that led to collaboration subsequently, and those kinds of attention to profiling FREDA over time. And our FREDA website has also been quite successful. So I think maybe those constitute the primary ones that come to my immediate mind. There may be more, Sarah.
No, that's so well said, Margaret. And I think you're the one who would know the most institutionally and historically up to date as to what those factors really were. So thank you. And as we wait for some Q&A questions to come in, we just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who is here. I'll leave both Margaret and my emails up on the screen if you'd like to reach out if you have any questions. And while we wait to see if the audience has any questions, Margaret, I was wondering because I know I've chatted with folks about this, and I didn't give you this question in advance, so I'm sorry. But many folks might not realize that centers like FREDA have no core funding, that a lot of this is working very hard for grants to maintain the center, and that most everything is a battle hard fought in terms of things like grants, office space, keeping FREDA present. So for folks who are thinking about starting centers similar to FREDA, do you have any insights or advice for folks who really need to know that grassroots centers, everything is hard fought and hard won, and it doesn't just come with a huge paycheck to keep the center running?
Well, I I got the sense you were wanting me to encourage them to.
Oh no, no, no,
No,
just tell them
no, no,
the
I understand.
strife.
Yes, well, it was most fortunate for me uh, that there was support even initially within the department because we did have at one point the Feminist Institute, which uh, then had another life as well. So you have to consider, you have to come to understand and connect with whomever you're working with, whether it's going to be a university department or your own organization that has other foci, that you have to connect with those who have like minds and build on those kinds of relationships, which happened here. That really moves everything along. And then once you make connections subsequently, as we did with organizations in the community, then you also get encouragement and support as we have for the FREDA Center elsewhere. So those are fairly simple-minded. Money really helps. And we were most fortunate initially. Of course, we had two, well, big chunks of money from the original funders. And then subsequently, SFU also provided some funding. But yeah, we're back to project-driven funding, and it's worked out. It is it can be a hard grind and worrisome. But my gosh, we made it through ups and downs with the funding. So yeah, just to encourage that, yes, it can happen.
It can happen, and Margaret makes it happen. So she doesn't give herself enough credit in how long the center has persisted and thrived. All right. Well, no questions have come in the Q&A. I think we've probably given so much information. And I did ask a number of questions. I maybe have asked things that would have come in otherwise. So I do just want to point everyone to the surveys. Those are also in the chat for you. And thank everyone for being here. And Margaret, thank you so much for sharing this space and having this conversation with me.
Thank you. Good deal.